Welcome to the PIO Podcast, a place for everything public information related for police, fire, EMS, and local governments.
It was a good learning experience for a lot of us that social media is not real life.
But we have to remember the media are very rarely a target audience. They're simply that conduit.
Our words have impacts on individuals, and it may not be positive. So just being thoughtful and mindful of the words that we speak.
I think what's so interesting about this position too, and this job and this profession, is that every one of us is looking for purpose, and when we find it here, that's it.
To know is that a crisis for one is not necessarily a crisis for another.
Hello everyone, hope you're enjoying our content. If you would be so kind and click the link at the bottom of today's episode notes, your support in any amount will keep the podcast going. Whatever you can provide will keep the lights on and the podcast growing. So sit back and enjoy today's episode.
Hey, on the PIO Podcast, we'd like to welcome Laurin Parthemos. She's a principal at the change management and training firm Kotter. Thank you for doing today's interview, Laurin.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
That I don't get this opportunity to have somebody of your background on the show, so this is a great opportunity, and it's a great topic that we're going to talk about.
Absolutely.
And I appreciate you taking the time to speak with me. I'm sure your schedule's incredibly busy.
I mean, aren't all of our schedules these days?
You know what? I'm semi-retired, so my schedule is pretty easygoing. I have this podcast, and I work part-time for Texas A&M, so it's like it's relative. My job's great. I love what I do, and it's this podcast is kind of like my retirement passion.
Oh, there you go. That sounds lovely.
Laurin, you work with a lot of government leaders. You're working to invest a variety of areas regarding artificial intelligence. So can we talk about that initially? What does that do? What are you doing right now?
It's a great question. So with Kotter, we've about 50 years of research in the change space and kind of that intersection of how to drive performance through culture, specifically adaptable cultures. And we do that both on the private and public sectors. And what's interesting is as we've been doing a lot of digital transformation lately, AI has become such a buzzword, and you see it more and more. And it's not necessarily that some of these transformations are AI focused, but there might be something tangentially there. So if it's a piece of a process that's automated or something along those lines, we are seeing it more and more. But what I find interesting is that as we work with our private sector clients, they're much more to actually adopt and take that next step to AI. Whereas we've been speaking a lot with our public sector, whether that's in the local government or even in the federal spaces, it's being spoken of, but there's a little bit of that hesitation to actually take the next step into execution and actually take that adoption to AI at this point.
Yeah, public sector agencies are notoriously slow to respond to any change, obviously, compared to the private sector. And adoption a lot of times becomes skepticism first, because and I know publicly the sentiment in regarding government and trust is really tough right now. And in the last couple of years, there was a study that's coming out of an organization out on the East Coast where in the last 2 years, public sentiment has dropped about trust when they're talking to public figures and then the messages they're getting out. And then all of a sudden you throw artificial intelligence in it, and now people get really skeptical. So what's the benefit for the adaptation of a public sector agency grabbing new technology like this?
I think AI does get a bad rap because there are some perceptions out there of what it truly is, and it's robots taking over, as some people think, or something along those lines. And whenever we're working with groups, specifically on the public sector side, we really advise against that kind of shiny object syndrome of not just adopting AI for the sake of saying that you're adopting AI. You need to have that end outcome in mind as you're thinking about it. What are you truly trying to achieve, and what's the cost benefit analysis? Especially as you're dealing with public funds, you can't just be throwing things to say, let's test something new. But there's so many uses where it can be applicable. I mean, just from a general context, as you think of AI in any business or work type setting, you have improved data analysis and predictive analytics so you can have better decision making, efficiency and automation to reduce backlogs. But specifically in that government sector, as you're thinking about it, how do we detect cybersecurity threats and protect our government documentation? How do we, and you can have predictive analytics, see where some of those threats might come from in the future. It could be from FEMA or NOAA if we're thinking about the increase of massive environmental and weather impacts. How can we use predictive analytics to think where might there be an impact and proactively prevent any harm or try to reduce the amount of damage that's done in a place and make sure you're allocating resources in the most effective ways. There's so many uses that it can be done on that government sector, even just down to regulatory bodies doing better surveillance. But the key of it in terms of getting ahead of that skepticism is making sure that that cost benefit is there. If there is a process in place that is working effectively and timely, then it might not be the time to refresh how things are being done with a new piece of technology. In other places, it could be massively beneficial.
I think the most simplest thing is getting a response from the government on simple things, simple answers, and having a AI engineered chatbot that can answer those questions rapidly. I could see that as being massive for communicating with the public when they can just get on your website, go to the chatbot, say, hey, I need to know how long my grass has to be before I get a ticket or something along those lines. Those are simple things that the public wants to have quick answers. And I think that is an area that could easily be adapted on the public side of it as opposed to the analytics side or the, monitoring side that might be.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. Having a way to interact with citizens in a better way is absolutely possible. If you're thinking about even data provenance of how do you trust the data, where it's coming from, you can have that strong track record with AI to show here's where the data came from, here's how it was analyzed, and here's what the outcome of the statistic that's being reported, or the piece of legislation that we're sharing with you. If you want to know how long your grass can be before you get a ticket and things like that, you can see where that source is and tie it end to end to help rebuild that trust and start gaining momentum in how you can effectively work with AI.
So government organizations, they tend to be people and employee wage and benefit heavy. I mean, that's a lot of their budget. That's most agencies, most government organizations, that's good 70% of their budget, which makes investment in technology like AI seem kind of an uphill battle. Have you seen that as a barrier?
I think that's one of the largest barriers that we see is that budget constraint side. And when push comes to shove, the skepticism is natural. It is something that we expect to see because there are concerns around security. What does this mean for our operations? There should be a level of skepticism as you're going forward. And this isn't the first time that we've seen this kind of skepticism around technology. If you think a few decades ago around the internet coming out, same kind of themes where there was a lot of security concerns. There was a lot of concern around job obsolescence. So what does that mean for the people who are doing the day-to-day? And as we're thinking about that benefit of using some of this technology, if you have that cost benefit in place of saying, we know that this piece of technology is actually best for us in the long run, it's as you're communicating, over-indexing on that why. So what's the intent of this adoption? Why are we doing it? What's the benefit of it? And what are those concerns that may pop up and address them proactively? So saying, we know that there's a concern around the cost of this. Here's what we're anticipating. Here's the buffer we've created. And here's the cost reduction afterwards to help make sure that it's a sound investment and that it's not something that's just a knee-jerk reaction because AI is so popular right now. It's a well thought out plan and over-indexing on it. And then on that second level, it's showing people that how they're along for their journey. So if there is a concern around job obsolescence, so saying my job may be automated and I won't have one in the future, is a natural concern. And it's sometimes the basis of some of these other concerns that are being spoken of more prominently. So if you kind of double click down to each level of why we're not doing something, it sometimes is distilled down into that concern of what does my future look like? And it's that proactive conversation around, as we adopt this, what does the role of individuals in this agency look like? What are we going to expect of you? And how are we going to bring you along for the journey? So it could be that we're transitioning people into higher value roles. You won't have to do the admin side of things anymore, but you can do a deeper level. And here's how we will train you to do that. So that way there's more of a willingness to discuss it, because you're not so much in this survive mindset of, oh my goodness, we're adopting this piece of technology and I may be out of a job because of it.
Right. And I'm going to talk about training in a second. I wanted to really quickly touch on, where is the government leaders, because they're so skeptical of new technology and the money that it costs. Can you give some other time saving or money saving technology that AI could put towards a public sector agency like police, fire, or EMS?
So other examples of where it can be implemented? So I see a lot of current chatter around in the public works sector. So thinking about managing roads. So where do you actually know where is the most need for maintenance, and how do you actually spend your budget effectively on some of those items? So whether it be on that federal aspect with all the grants that are being sent out, or even just a local municipality thinking about just from a pothole to pothole phase.
Oh, I just thought of something. I was thinking about this the other day. The community I live in, it's the relatively older downtown area, and they've just had a series of water main breaks, and they said that this pipe was 120 years old, and I'm thinking that's probably something that maybe in some employee's mind way back, oh yeah, we got to get to that, and then it's in and out of the year and forgotten. And if you had an AI that was monitoring that might say, okay, these are what's coming up and this is where we need to budget for.
Absolutely.
I could see that as being beneficial.
Absolutely. A lot of things just get lost in a spreadsheet. As people retire and move on to their next roles, some of that inherent knowledge of where there might be priorities ends up being lost and it's not uncovered again. So it's having a tool that can just proactively let you know, here's where your priority list probably should be. It might not have been actively monitored, but this bridge probably due for just a double check, not necessarily from a regulatory standpoint to do an inspection, but maybe just double check it over here. Look at the pipes.
And I will tell you this, Illinois is the worst state, I think, in the country for bridge maintenance. And they are in horrible condition. And I think there was something like 60 to 70% of the bridges where could potentially fail in the next 10 years, and the money for the budget does not exist. So that is something that I could see that somewhere down the line AI would be really beneficial for.
Absolutely. And as you're thinking about it, realistically speaking, the budgets for bridge maintenance aren't necessarily the budget just for bridge maintenance. It is the government budget. So if you know that in 10 years there is a huge need to assess all that, what's that impact on some of the other projects that are going on, because you'll have to pull resources from somewhere before a catastrophe happens. And using these tools to proactively manage and assess the risk in some of these places is massively beneficial.
You know, Laurin, government organizations, they've trained their employees to meet the minimum requirements to fulfill job descriptions. I mean, that's kind of like, that's the unfortunate thing. It's the Johnny Bravo. You fit the suit, that's what you wear, and that's it. What does a good training program look like, and how do they ensure that the employee carries the takeaways from the training to their day-to-day work?
Absolutely. And I don't think that this is public sector specific. I see this across private sector, any size organization. We frequently see an underinvestment in skills training. And the largest issue we see is that you go to a flashy seminar, you might spend a day in a classroom, you talk about all of these great benefits of this new way of working together or this new tool, you write all your notes, you get really jazzed, and then you never look at that notebook again. And when push comes to shove, that's the crux of it, is that we're not training for retention or utilization in those kinds of scenarios. And when we think about training, especially in the public sector where skills training is so massively important, it's around micro learnings. So not having everything be necessarily in a large space, but letting people absorb the information and know what questions to ask. So after you've sat with it for a little bit, take the next level of training. After you've sat with that, take the next level. And working in those smaller cohorts with people who are going to be using, in this case, technology in the same way. So you can ask each other questions. You can try to break it a little bit and all work together and see what actually needs to be done. And to that, it's that hands-on learning. You can't just have a screen share saying, this is the tool, here's how you put in the data, this is what happens, and here's the report. You need to roll up your sleeves and really start to grapple with it if you are going to learn it truly, and not just for the day, but actually inherently within your job. It is something that is crucial, that hands-on learning aspect, to drive retention.
Let's take a quick break.
Are you ready to take your business to the top? Join Dr. Lyman Montgomery on Sail to the Top, the podcast that dives into the real issues business owners and HR pros face every day. From compliance headaches to team challenges, Dr. Montgomery reveals the secrets to scaling with success. Don't just survive, thrive. Listen to Sail to the Top wherever you get your podcast.
And one thing that I've seen that frequently happens with employees that go to good training and they've see something, okay, this is something I've learned. This will change our process at work. And I want to talk to my boss and I want to try and change this process. And then you get to that supervisor or to that leader and you say, this is what I want to change. And they say, that's great, but yeah, we're not doing that. And now the employee is completely dejected because they had this idea that would maybe clean up their process. Because most of the time, the employee knows where some of the choke points are in their job, where there's room for improvement. But because government organizations are stuck in very rigid rules and processes, that it makes it hard, and that dejects the employee, and then the employee becomes bitter, and then they don't want to be involved in anything but collecting a paycheck and going home.
I completely agree with that statement. And we see it all too often, is that there's a great energy by an individual around a new way of doing things, but it's framed as, look at this exciting thing that we can do. Framing it around a problem of saying, here is the issue, here is the impact on how we work together. And by doing it differently, here are how much better we can do things. So is it hours saved? Is it money saved? What is that benefit of changing, and how do we resolve a problem, is a great way to start framing at the very front end. But there's also an aspect here around leaders and how they lead their teams. We see all too often that we actually need, as we work with organizations, private or public, is that there is no shortage of ideas from what I like to call the boots on the ground, so to speak, or the volunteer army of individuals. There's always an idea of how you could do something better, and there's limited resources, but it's working with the leaders to actually open their aperture and be willing to be those change leaders, to say, I'm willing to hear you and I'm willing to discuss what that idea is. And a lot of times that's not necessarily there because there's so many competing priorities. But if you want to build a truly adaptable culture, and a culture that can withstand all of these changes that are going on, whether it be technology or just, we're in an unprecedented time of change across the board. And in order to succeed, you need to be adaptable. And it comes from the top first.
Absolutely. And going into that, especially kind of talking back to the AI thing, unions are really fierce defenders in the public sector of their membership and of loss of work positions and things like that. So how can a government leader effectively integrate that new technology of AI into those workflows without panicking employees and disrupting what is already working?
Absolutely. And the goal of a union is to improve the lives of their members, protect their members, make sure that they are not necessarily being taken advantage of in any way. And the crux of the scenario here is that this isn't necessarily we want you to do more work and a battle between union and non-union. This is a fundamental shift in our environment as we adopt new technology. And there will be tough conversations, as there should be, but it's more so clearly articulating that why, so to speak. And we see it in not just unions, but any leader who is concerned about their department or their group becoming redundant, or the work that they do is becoming redundant in some sort of way, fiercely protecting to prevent change from happening so that they can continue with the livelihood of their teams. And it's explaining, like I said before, the why of this is the benefit, and not only the benefit, but from specifically a union's perspective, here's how we want to bring you along for the journey so that you can meet this new industry that we're working in, this new way of operation, because we don't want you to be a laggard and lose any potential job opportunity in the future. Here's how we're protecting you by bringing you up to speed on the latest skills. And it will take some back and forth, and it won't be the easiest, but it's coming from a place that should be around how do we do this together.
Right. I you know what, I like that, because a lot of times it's like, you're going to do this, you don't have a choice. And in reality, you want to give that person an investment for themselves, and you can only win them over by showing them that there's a value,
Exactly.
and value for them. Right?
Yeah. And that's exactly it. It is an investment in someone. It's not meant to be additional work for additional work's sake. It is about bringing those union members to the next phase of operations. Just like I said with the internet, if you don't have internet skills now, it's going to be very difficult to work in a lot of desk jobs and things like that. So it's more so explaining so that people know that it's best intent. And when push comes to shove, you're not going to have a choice in the change. A lot of times it's
Right.
here, but it's not the agency that's met or you're working against that is the reason for it. It is external environmental factors that is forcing this change. So it's working together to find a resolution towards it.
Yeah, and I know, like, for my job and the job that I used to do as a public information officer, there was a lot of fear amongst our network of people about the use of AI, because they're thinking initially it was like, oh, this is going to eliminate public information officers, and really it's not. What I've seen, and this is why I've embraced the AI concept and the tools that it gives, is it provides us with that next step and that leap that sometimes we can't make just simply because we have too much other clutter in the mind. And AI can help you narrow your focus. It can help you take a concept that you've given it instructions to and give you a point to start. And then you can go from there. And it's not writing your press releases. It's not writing your content. It provides you that initial step, and then you go from there. And I think that's important for everybody to understand, is it's not going to take over. It may eliminate portions of jobs, but it only will enhance a job in the future.
Absolutely. It's removing the administrative side of things, or that piece of everyone's job where they're just like, oh, I got to click a couple buttons and it's going to take a while, but then I can get to the deep thought that I have to do. It's allowing people to spend time on higher level activities, and allowing people who might not have had the exposure to those higher level activities be able to be part of it now.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a law firm in New York City, a lawyer. His name's Greg Mantuski, a PR guy that has instituted AI into his entire firm.
Yeah.
And they have an AI where it's public sector now, where you can write a press release. You'll go through and put the information you need. It'll write the press release, and then you can go and clean it up to what you need. That saves you an immense amount of time instead of having to recreate the whole wheel every time. And in our job, especially in the public sector, we're always using templates. And those are pre-written templates that make job easier. Well, this is doing it in a little different aspect, but giving it a better flavor in a sense.
Absolutely. I mean, especially where AI is now, you can always tell something's AI written. It's not the cleanest content, so you can
Yeah,
always tell.
the tone.
Yeah, the tone isn't there. It's a little off sometimes, but that doesn't mean that it can't be a tool to help you get started. As I think about when I write articles, I use AI to help me write an outline to make sure I didn't forget any detail that I might have not thought of. And it's not writing for me, but it's helping me through my process. So something that used to take 2 hours could take 45 minutes.
Right. I'll tell you, that's the one thing I've learned using it is asking it to ask questions to clarify things for you so that you get exactly the information back that you can write on. And of course, AI is not perfect. It's going to come up with sources that maybe don't exist, or if they existed, they're not exactly 100%, accurate. You have to like dig into that. So you can't just cut and paste the sources that they give you without verifying and vetting them. And again, that's writing anywhere. You have to vet and verify your sources.
Absolutely, but that's also
so I think that's important.
That's also why I like it, the context currently around the internal usage. So if you're thinking about data and how, if there's a crisis, so to speak, you need to give data and statistics. You're running AI on your own data. It's not using external sources that might have data inaccuracies. So you can control the quality of the output a little bit more, and it's a contained data set that you're running the intelligence off of. And as we go forward and as ChatGPT or Gemini gets smarter and a little bit better, it could be used on those external data sources a little bit more. But being able to say, for example, in COVID, there was a lot of conversation around the timeliness of mortality data, and some states taking 12 or more weeks to produce things. You can have it at a faster rate because you're running it off of your own data set and go a little bit faster. So you can have cleaner, more accurate, more representative information, live time as an end goal.
And I will tell you that those mortality rates on that, if you had an AI that could scrub it better, you would find that just because somebody had COVID 6 months prior and then they died from another illness later on, that's not a COVID death, but there were some states that were categorizing those as COVID
Absolutely.
deaths.
You can see the data provenance behind things and actually show what the true data is behind something, which just helps to build trust, especially in that public information officer space.
Laurin, one of the things that really impacts public sector agencies now, and this is becoming even private sector too, is ransomware. Is there, in your background and what you know about AI, is there like an area of AI that is looking at helping to screen that stuff coming through, like especially phishing attacks? Most of those ransomware things are phishing attacks. Is there AI that's being utilized to deal with that, to protect?
I can't think of any of the latest ransomware off the top of my head. A lot of it's going to be built in, or various different groups are going to have something that's scanning on top of any inbound pieces of information and automatically identify phishing attempts and things like that. We haven't worked very recently on ransomware, and I'd be curious to see what the latest. So I'd have to dive into that one a little bit more.
Yeah, I would just be curious to know, because I think that is an area humans are, we're always going to make the mistake and click on a link, especially when we're busy and distracted. Absolutely. Right? Oh, email came in through, read this immediately, click, and the next thing you know, your computer's locked up. You just locked the business out of multi-million dollars, and somebody's going to have to pay some crypto money to some organization in another country, and if you want to unlock it.
And I would say it's nothing new. I've heard of organizations, I think this was about 10 years ago, where someone accidentally sent out $10,000 or more because they thought the CEO had emailed them asking for an invoice to be paid. I see even to this day, text messages are coming in a lot where they'll understand the organization structure and send text messages out to employees saying, hey, it's a CEO, I'm at this conference. Can you look into this particular company that I just met? Click the link and then your data is compromised. And so you see it more and more. And a lot of what I know companies are doing, as well, it's baked into a lot of software that you're already utilizing. It's also training employees to be able to understand or look into phishing attempts. Did something come through a non-authorized channel like a text message? Probably don't respond to it. And just double checking each one of those small characters on any link that you're being sent to make sure that it's actually a true link and not.
And check the email address, because just because the name is there does not necessarily mean it's the user that's sending it.
Absolutely.
So, Laurin, what other areas of AI is your organization looking to incorporate into government and into the function that's going on worldwide?
Absolutely. So, as I said before, we very much do not believe in AI for AI's sake, of implementing technology to say, hey, look at this new flashy object. So really what we do is we work on an agency or municipality level basis to see how are you operating and what are your needs, and we can implement the right piece of technology or the right solution for you. And that's really where our focus is. It's where we, I would say, focused most is not necessarily from an AI perspective, but from a change and adaptability perspective. So finding the right solution for you, and that may not be technology. It may be how you're operating with each other and how you're structured. And that might be a bigger fix more than anything else. And so as we work with public sector, where we've been highlighting mostly is we've been working with a lot of, on the federal side especially, on the change adaptability piece of how do we work with leaders to start identifying changes that might need to be made, bringing people along so there's not change fatigue, and understanding the why behind what this new way of working is, to make sure that as we implement new pieces of technology or processes or AI, that it won't be seen as a immediate shut off of I can't deal with change anymore, but more so open aperture to say, yes, we should be doing this. Let's take this next step. Let's do something differently.
And I'm sure on the federal side, because they are such dinosaurs of change, and the politics of just getting an organization to change what they do because they bought a piece of software from somebody else's politically connected organization. That can be a very big upward battle.
Absolutely. It is an upward battle, but not necessarily for the wrong reasons. There is a need, if the money has been spent, find a way to make it work, because you don't want to be wasting government funds, and it's an understandable concern. So as we think about it, it's more so, like I said, right sizing the solution. What's the best way to move forward? And as we think about change, at the heart of Kotter, we have 8 accelerators from our research, and the very beginning of that is creating a sense of urgency. And what we mean by urgency in this context is, because I know that's sometimes a triggering word depending on the sector you work in, especially if you're an EMT, you don't want to hear urgent. But in this context, it really means, how do we get people focused and excited about something new? How do we get this to be a priority and deprioritize other things? And that's really what it comes down to, is creating that sense of urgency so that people will take those next steps and be willing to take those next steps with you. And if you don't have that foundation of that urgency and the grounding of why, your change won't be successful. Because when push comes to shove, how many times have you seen a process or a change, quote unquote, that's happened and it was advertised one way, or maybe finishing at a date, and that it was completely different by the end of it? Maybe it was cost overruns, maybe it was a pivot in a plan, they uncovered something. It's messy. Change will change. There's reasons to do things differently. And if you don't have that foundation of why, you won't have the buy-in of when those changes need to occur.
Laurin, is there a question I should have asked? And if so, how would you have answered it?
I don't think that there is a question that you might have asked. I think really the heart of this is, and I know that AI is the current buzzword, 5 years ago was blockchain, but when push comes to shove, there is a rate of change that is increasing at unprecedented speeds. And it's not just the adoption of new technology, but new ways of working at the core of it. And to be successful and to be providing the best services possible in the most fiscally responsible way as an agency or municipality, it's all around being able to adopt to that new rate of change and how you bring people on board and effectively bring in new technologies. And that's the key of it. So it's AI now. 5 years from now, we'll have something new. But it's about how to be prudent and how to really effectively do it and lead in a way that will bring people along.
Thank you. And, I didn't ask you this before, and I should have asked you, so I'm going to have to move this all the way to the front of the interview. What's your background, Laurin?
Absolutely. So I started my career actually in the finance sector. So I was working for BB&T in their Fairfax office. So I was working with a lot of government contractors in the lending space. That morphed into doing M&A and fundraising and advisory work with a lot of the banks, so highly regulated fields. And what I learned most by doing that advisory and being kind of inside is that as anything would be adopted, I'd say, you don't have the people on board, you're not going to get the KPIs that you want, and just kind of trying to champion that. But as in any very analytical organization, so thinking big banks, the human element, especially back then, wasn't prioritized. It was around being metrics driven. And that's really how I found Kotter, was finding that blend of, in order to get your results from a business perspective, you also need to have the buy-in from the people that the change is happening to. And that's how you optimize that intersection of business and culture. And from there, I've been working more and more, not just in the finance sector. I've blended into the public space. So I've been doing a lot of public sector work. I've been working to build out our training programs to the GSA and working through the mass schedule and just kind of specializing in all things government for Kotter.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time to do today's interview, because your background is immense. When I started looking into you for this interview, I mean, you have such a broad spectrum of background and the knowledge that you have. I mean, I could sit here and interview you for hours on stuff, and you would just be able to put it out there, which is amazing, to say the least. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I know it's a very diverse background. And like I said at the beginning, it's kind of a question mark, being like, the finance girl is talking government, but it actually is something that's been buried in throughout my entire career and woven throughout. So it's been a lot of fun to get back to it.
And, you talk about, if you don't have the employee buy-in, and that is a government organization in the beginning. I mean, you look at the U.S. Postal Service for an example. I mean, they used to have employee buy-in years ago when the postman knew everybody, and now it's much different. And you could see that this is an organization that I think, in my personal belief, in the next 10 years, probably will not exist the way it currently is now, unless it makes a dramatic change.
Absolutely. I think there is room for a dramatic change, and it's figuring out, like we've said before, there are issues that are boots on the ground level issues of things that we can do more effectively. And if those calls for change continually go unheard, you're going to lose the buy-in of the individuals that are doing the work day to day. So figuring out how to work collectively to find a way to be more effective. If it's happening in the private sector, it can happen in the public sector. It might just be a little bit slower, but it can happen.
All right, let's go to some rapid fire questions.
All right.
Texting or talking?
Texting people I regularly see, talking to those that I do not.
Movie or a book?
Lately, movies, because I haven't been paying attention to what's actually on the screen lately. It's just a moving object in front of me.
I get that. Coffee, tea, or energy drink?
Coffee.
Adult drink of choice?
I like a gin cocktail.
What's your gin?
Generally Hendrix, but I've been starting to get into gunpowder more recently. So it's an Irish gin. So
there you go.
Definitely recommend.
I've actually had that. That's really good.
It's a really good one.
It is. And so is aviation gin. That's a good one too.
Yes.
What would be your superpower if you could have one?
Teleportation, because I always appreciate a journey, but if I have to spend any more time in New York City gridlock, I'll be very upset.
It would be nice to be able to just be there.
Yeah, exactly.
Ask permission or beg for forgiveness?
With government work, we always ask permission, but it's the other aspects of my life where it's more likely forgiveness.
What place would you most like to travel to?
So I have my honeymoon coming up in October. So going to a dream trip out to the Maldives and just kind of do a ton of water sports.
Wow.
I started learning how to windsurf this past weekend, so should be a good amount of fun.
Well, congratulations and enjoy.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
What's your favorite way to relax after a long day?
Generally go out to the park, so right along the East River, get a couple of friends and just kind of relax and chit chat.
Chill. Yeah.
Yeah.
If you could sit down and have coffee with any historical figure, living or dead, who would it be?
This changes depending what Wikipedia rabbit hole I am on any given day, to be honest with you. But I think right now what I find really fascinating is probably Da Vinci. And I go back to this one a lot just because the intersection of art and science and engineering and just being so forward thinking for his time, while also just being a character that was well respected and liked. He wasn't a pariah. He was someone that everyone liked at a party. It's fascinating. Yeah. I would love to meet him.
Yeah, that would be an interesting one. And that, by the way, that is out of 400 interviews I've done, that's the first time his name's ever come up. So
Really?
Thank you very much. Yes, thank you. Yeah, as an Italian, I love it. Thank you. All right, final thoughts. What key points would you like our listeners to take from today's interview?
I would say when push comes to shove, it's all around adaptability at every level. So leaders being open to adaptability, to employees be willing to buy into anything that's happening from their next steps forward. Change is scary. You don't know necessarily where you're going, but it's being willing to accept it because it's going to be happening more and more.
Absolutely. Is there a piece of wisdom or a motto that you live by?
I would say that it doesn't matter how many times you trip and fall or you fail or you're not successful. It's how often you kind of pick yourself up and keep going forward.
Nice. I like that. How can people best reach out to you if they want to connect or follow up or implement something in their organization?
I would say the easiest way to get in touch with me is through LinkedIn. So it's Laurin Parthemos at LinkedIn. It's a fairly unique name, so I should be the only one that pops up when you go to search for me.
And I will put the link in the show notes so they'll be able to find it.
Wonderful.
Laurin, thank you very much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me, Robert. I really appreciate it.
You were awesome. Thank you.
That's all for this week. We hope you enjoyed this episode.
Thank you for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast to get notified on the latest episode. If you are listening on a platform that allows you to leave a review, please give us a review. Any review is appreciated. To support our efforts with the PIO podcast, you can click on the support button in the show notes, and any donation is appreciated. Thank you.